The telegram that arrived at noon changed everything, though Marianne Sanders wouldn't discover its contents until it was far too late to matter. She stood on the weathered platform of the Ogden depot in Utah Territory, her traveling trunk at her feet, and her reticule clutched in both hands as though it might anchor her to something solid in a world that had just tilted sideways. The September sun beat down mercilessly, turning the wooden platform into a griddle beneath her worn boots. It was 1878, and she had traveled 3 weeks by train from Philadelphia to meet a man who had promised her marriage, security, and a fresh start in the West. Frederick Morton had written her beautiful letters over the course of 6 months, each one more persuasive than the last. His words had painted pictures of a thriving ranch, a comfortable home, and a life far removed from the crowded tenement where she had worked her fingers raw as a seamstress. Now those letters felt like ashes in her memory. The telegram had been brief, delivered by a nervous station clerk who couldn't meet her eyes. Frederick Morton had married someone else 2 weeks ago, a local woman with property and connections. He would not be coming to collect Marianne from the station. He suggested she find her own way back east, and he wished her well in her future endeavors. The platform gradually emptied as passengers departed with waiting family members or hired conveyances. Marianne watched them go, feeling increasingly like a piece of forgotten luggage. She had exactly $12.30 to her name. The return fare to Philadelphia would cost at least 3 times that amount, and even if she could afford it, what waited for her there? The boarding house where she had rented a tiny room had already given her space to someone else. Her position at the dress shop had been filled. Her few friends had already said their goodbyes, believing she was headed toward a better life. The sun moved across the sky. Marianne's stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since a stale roll that morning. She sat on her trunk, trying to formulate some kind of plan. She could seek work here in Ogden, perhaps. Find a room somewhere cheap. Start over again, just as she had planned, but alone and with almost no resources in a town where she knew no one. The sound of hoofbeats on packed dirt drew her attention. A man rode up to the station on a bay horse, leading a pack mule behind him. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on solid ground, and tied both animals to the hitching post near the platform. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that needed cutting. He wore dusty range clothes and a battered hat pushed back on his head. When he stepped up onto the platform, his boots made solid, confident sounds against the wood. Marianne tried to make herself smaller, less noticeable. She didn't want questions or, worse, the kind of attention a woman alone sometimes attracted. The man walked into the station office, and she heard the low rumble of his voice speaking with the clerk. A few minutes later, he emerged with a small bundle of mail and supplies. He noticed her then, really noticed her, and stopped in his tracks. His eyes were a startling shade of green against his tanned face, and they held an expression of concern rather than the calculating interest she had feared. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice a warm baritone with a slight drawl that suggested time spent in multiple territories. "Are you waiting for someone?" Marianne's first instinct was to lie, to preserve her dignity and pretend everything was fine. But exhaustion and hunger and the sheer weight of disappointment crushed that impulse. "I was," she said quietly, "but they're not coming." The man's expression shifted, something protective and almost angry flickering across his features. "Someone left you here at the station, alone." "It's complicated," Marianne said, though it really wasn't. It was painfully simple. She had been foolish enough to trust promises made on paper by a man she had never met. The cowboy glanced at the sun, now beginning its descent toward the western mountains, then back at her. She could see him thinking, weighing something in his mind. Finally, he said words that would change both their lives forever. "I'll take you home." Marianne blinked at him. "I'm sorry, what?" "To my ranch. It's about 15 miles northwest of here. You can stay there until you figure out what you want to do next. My sister lives there too, so it's all proper. You'll have a safe place to sleep and regular meals while you get your bearings." It was such an unexpected offer that Marianne couldn't immediately process it. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." The man removed his hat, revealing the flattened hair beneath. "My name is Yates Quinn. I own a horse ranch up in the foothills, and I'm offering because it's the right thing to do. Can't leave a lady stranded at a train station with night coming on. This is a decent town, but it's still rough territory. A woman alone attracts the wrong kind of notice." Marianne studied his face, trying to assess whether this was genuine kindness or something more sinister. But his eyes were steady and honest, and there was nothing predatory in his posture. He stood at a respectful distance, hat in hand, waiting for her answer without pressure. "Your sister lives with you?" she asked, grasping onto that detail as a measure of safety. "Eliza. She's 19, been keeping house since our parents passed 2 years back. She'll be glad of the company, truth be told. Gets lonely up there with just the two of us and the hired hands." 19. That meant he was probably in his mid-20s, Marianne guessed. She was 22 herself, old enough to have learned caution but young enough to still hope for kindness in unexpected places. "I don't want to impose," she said carefully, "and I can't pay you. I have very little money." Yates shook his head. "I'm not asking for payment. I'm offering hospitality to someone in need. That's how we do things out here. How we're supposed to do things anyway." He glanced back at the station office, his jaw tightening slightly. "Did someone promise to meet you here?" Marianne nodded, not trusting her voice, "and they just didn't show." "Didn't send word." "They sent word," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just not in time for me to make other arrangements." Yates's expression darkened. "That's low, real low." He looked at her again and his features softened. "Look, Miss Sanders, Marianne Sanders. Miss Sanders, I can see you're in a difficult spot. I'm offering a solution with no strings attached. You stay at the ranch as our guest for as long as you need. My sister can probably help you find work in town if that's what you want, or maybe something closer if you prefer. But right now, you need a safe place to be, and I've got one to offer. That's the whole of it." Marianne wanted to weep from the simple decency of the gesture. Instead, she straightened her spine and nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I accept your offer and I'm grateful for it." Relief crossed his face, as though he had been genuinely worried she would refuse and he would have to leave her here. "Call me Yates. No need for formality when we're going to be neighbors under the same roof for a spell." He moved to her trunk and hefted it with ease despite its weight. "This all you've got?" "Yes. I traveled light." He carried the trunk to his pack mule and secured it with practiced efficiency. Then he returned and offered his hand to help her down from the platform. His grip was warm and calloused, strong without being crushing. He led her to his horse, a beautiful bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. "This is Redwood," Yates said, stroking the horse's neck. "He'll carry us both without complaint. I'll mount first, then pull you up behind me. Have you ridden before?" "Not much," Marianne admitted. "A few times when I was very young. Just hold on to me and move with the horse's rhythm. We'll take it easy." Yates swung into the saddle with fluid grace, then extended his hand down to her. Marianne grasped it, placed her foot on top of his in the stirrup as he instructed, and felt herself lifted smoothly up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, acutely aware that she was sitting closer to a man than she ever had before, her arms necessarily wrapped around his waist to keep her balance. Comfortable enough, Yates asked over his shoulder. Yes, thank you. He clicked his tongue and touched his heels to the horse's sides. Redwood moved forward at a gentle walk, the pack mule following on its lead rope. They left the station behind, heading up a dusty road that led northwest out of Ogden. For a while, they rode in silence. Marianne watched the landscape change around them as they left the town behind. The land here was different from anything she had known in the East. The air was drier, the light somehow sharper and clearer. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the September warmth. The valley stretched out in shades of gold and brown, with occasional splashes of green where water ran. It's beautiful, she said quietly. It is, Yates agreed. Took me a while to see it coming from greener country myself, but it gets into your blood after a time. All this space, this big sky, makes you feel both small and free at once. Where are you from originally? Kentucky. Came west after the war with my folks and Eliza. We tried farming first down in Salt Lake Valley, but the land we could afford wasn't much good. My father had a way with horses, though, so we moved up here where there's better grazing and started breeding and training instead. Turned out to be the right choice. I'm sorry about your parents. Thank you. Fever took them both within a week of each other. Broke our hearts, but we managed. Had to grow up quick, both Eliza and me, but we had each other and we had the ranch. That counted for a lot. Marianne felt his words settle around her own grief. She had lost her parents 2 years ago to different diseases in that crowded Philadelphia tenement. She knew what it meant to be young and suddenly alone in the world, responsible for your own survival. What brought you west, if you don't mind my asking? Yates said. You've got the sound of eastern cities in your voice. Marianne hesitated, then decided he deserved honesty after his kindness. I was supposed to marry someone, a man I met through correspondence. He owned a ranch and wanted a wife. I was working as a seamstress in Philadelphia with no family and no prospects. It seemed like a good match. But he was the one who didn't meet you at the station. Yes. He married someone else instead. Sent word, but not soon enough for me to stop my journey. Yates was quiet for a moment. That's a hard thing. I'm sorry it happened to you. So am I. But I suppose it's better to know before the marriage than after. That's a practical way of looking at it. I've learned to be practical. Survival requires it. They rode on as the sun continued its descent. The road wound through increasingly rugged terrain, climbing gradually into foothills covered with sage and scrub oak. Yates pointed out landmarks as they went, explaining the territory with the ease of someone who knew every rock and tree. He showed her where a spring fed a small creek, where wild horses sometimes came to drink, where the boundary of his property began. I've got about 800 acres, he explained. Not huge by some standards, but good grazing land and enough water to support a decent herd. Right now, I've got about 30 horses in various stages of training, plus breeding stock. We sell mostly to the Army and to ranchers who need solid working horses. That sounds like hard work. It is, but I enjoy it. Every horse is different, has its own personality and needs. Takes patience and attention, but when you see a green horse turn into something reliable and responsive, something another person can depend on, it's satisfying in a way nothing else quite matches. Marianne heard the passion in his voice and felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. This was a man who loved what he did, who had built something meaningful with his own hands. It was attractive in a way she hadn't anticipated. The ranch came into view as they crested a rise. It nestled in a natural fold of the hills, protected from the worst winds by the terrain itself. There was a sturdy house built of wood and stone, a large barn, several corrals, and a few smaller outbuildings. Everything looked well maintained and functional. Horses grazed in the nearest pasture, their coats gleaming in the slanting sunlight. "Home," Yates said simply. As they approached, a young woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun to see who was arriving. She was slight and pretty, with the same dark hair as her brother and a dusting of freckles across her nose. When she saw that Yates had a passenger, her expression shifted to surprise and curiosity. Yates dismounted and helped Marianne down. Her legs felt stiff and unsteady after the ride, and she had to grip his arm for a moment to find her balance. "Eliza," Yates called to his sister. "This is Miss Marianne Sanders. She was stranded at the station in Ogden. I invited her to stay with us for a while until she gets sorted." Eliza's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly and came forward with a warm smile. "Of course. You're very welcome, Miss Sanders. Let me show you inside. You must be exhausted from traveling. Please call me Marianne, and thank you. Your brother has been very kind." Eliza shot a glance at Yates that held approval and a touch of sisterly amusement. "Well, he has his moments. Come on, let's get you settled. Are you hungry?" "I've got stew on the stove." The mention of food made Marianne's stomach clench with hunger. "That sounds wonderful." Yates began unloading Marianne's trunk while Eliza led her toward the house. Inside, it was simpler than anything Marianne had lived in since childhood, but clean and comfortable. The main room served as kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A sturdy table and chairs occupied the center, and hand-braided rugs covered the wooden floor. Curtains hung at the windows, and Marianne noticed small touches that spoke of Eliza's care. Wildflowers in a jar, cushions on the chairs, a carefully pieced quilt thrown over the back of a worn sofa. "Your room will be through here," Eliza said, leading her to a small bedroom off the main space. It held a narrow bed with a simple frame, a chest of drawers, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. A window looked out toward the mountains. "It's not fancy, but it's private and the roof doesn't leak." "It's perfect," Marianne said and meant it. After the uncertainty of the past hours, having any space to call her own felt like a luxury. Yates appeared with her trunk and set it at the foot of the bed. "I'll let you ladies get acquainted," he said. "I need to tend the animals before dark." After he left, Eliza poured water into the basin. "You can wash up if you'd like. I'll get supper on the table. Take your time." Alone in the little room, Marianne sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. Tears came then, hot and fast, born of exhaustion and relief and lingering humiliation. She had been such a fool, trusting a stranger's letters, believing in promises that had cost nothing to make and even less to break. But she had also been desperate, she reminded herself. Desperate and hopeful, which was a dangerous combination. She allowed herself 5 minutes of tears, then washed her face in the cool water, tidied her hair, and went to join Eliza in the main room. The stew was thick with vegetables and venison, served with fresh bread that Eliza had baked that morning. Marianne ate 2 full bowls, hardly tasting the food in her hunger. Yates returned from the barn and joined them at the table, and the 3 of them ate together in comfortable near silence. "So what's your trade?" Eliza asked when the initial hunger had been satisfied. "Yates mentioned you were a seamstress." "Yes. I worked in a dress shop in Philadelphia. I can do most kinds of needlework, mending, alterations, full garments if needed." Eliza's face lit up. "Oh, that's wonderful. I'm terrible with a needle. I can do basic repairs, but anything fancy is beyond me. And there's definitely need for that kind of skill around here. Mrs. Patterson in town does some dressmaking, but she's getting on in years and can barely keep up with demand." "I'd be happy to help with any mending you need," Marianne offered, "to earn my keep." "You're a guest, not a servant," Yates said firmly. "But if you want to keep your hands busy, I'm sure Eliza would appreciate the help." That night, Marianne lay in the narrow bed listening to unfamiliar sounds. The wind in the eaves, the distant call of a coyote, the creak of the house settling. She was hundreds of miles from everything she had known, in the home of strangers who had shown her more genuine kindness in a few hours than Frederick Morton had in 6 months of correspondence. She thought about Yates Quinn, about the steady way he had looked at her, the quiet strength in his voice when he said he would take her home. She thought about his hands, work roughened and capable, gentle with the horses and careful with her trunk. She thought about the way he had spoken of his land and his work, with a passion that made both come alive in her imagination. It was dangerous to start thinking of a man in such terms, especially so soon after being disappointed by another. But as sleep finally claimed her, Marianne couldn't help feeling that perhaps Frederick Morton's betrayal had been a strange sort of blessing. If he had kept his promise, she would have married him, and she never would have met the green-eyed cowboy who had stopped at the station and changed everything. The next few days fell into a rhythm that was both strange and comforting. Marianne woke early, unused to the quiet of the ranch after years of city noise. She helped Eliza with breakfast and household chores, grateful for something to occupy her hands and mind. Yates and his 2 hired men, Tom and Jacob, worked with the horses from dawn until dusk, breaking for meals and little else. Marianne found herself watching Yates when she thought he wouldn't notice. She watched him work with a young mare in the round pen, his movements patient and deliberate, his voice low and soothing. She watched him repair a section of fence, his muscles shifting beneath his shirt as he drove posts into the hard ground. She watched him at the dinner table, listening to Eliza chatter about her day, his expression fond and attentive. He was, she realized, a genuinely good man. Not performatively good, not good because someone was watching, but good in the deep, essential way that shaped every action and decision. He was kind to his sister, fair with his employees, gentle with his animals, and respectful to Marianne in a way that made her feel both safe and valued. On the 3rd day, Eliza asked if Marianne would ride into town with her to pick up supplies and visit Mrs. Patterson, the dressmaker. Yates hitched up the wagon, and the 2 women made the journey together. Ogden looked different in daylight, bustling and busy rather than the lonely place Marianne remembered from the station platform. Mrs. Patterson was a round woman with steel-gray hair and shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Eliza explained that Marianne was an experienced seamstress from Philadelphia, and Mrs. Patterson immediately brightened. "Can you do fine work? Detail stitching, proper seams, fitted garments." Marianne showed her the stitching on her own dress, which she had made herself. Mrs. Patterson examined it closely, then nodded with satisfaction. "I could use help. Got more orders than I can handle, especially with the harvest dance coming up next month. All the young ladies want new dresses. If you're willing to work, I can pay you piece rate, fair wages for good work." It was exactly what Marianne needed, a way to earn money and establish herself in this new place. They agreed on terms, and Mrs. Patterson gave her 3 dresses to alter, due in a week. On the ride back to the ranch, Eliza chattered happily about the arrangement. "This is wonderful. You can work from the ranch, and I can drive you into town when you need to deliver or pick up work. It's perfect." "Your brother might not want me staying on now that I have employment," Marianne said carefully. "I should probably find a room in town." Eliza looked horrified. "Don't you dare. Yates would be furious if you left, and besides, I like having you here. It's nice having another woman to talk to." "Please stay, at least for a while longer." Marianne found she wanted to stay more than was probably wise. If you're sure I'm not imposing. You're not imposing. You're helping me and you're good company. That's worth more than you know. That evening, Marianne mentioned the arrangement to Yates. He looked up from the harness he was mending, his green eyes catching the lamplight. That's good news about the work. I'm glad it came through so quick. Eliza invited me to stay on at the ranch rather than finding a room in town. I wanted to make sure that was acceptable to you. Something flickered across Yates's face, something that looked almost like relief. Of course it's acceptable. You're welcome here as long as you want to stay. Honestly, Eliza's happier than I've seen her in months. You're good for her. She's been very kind to me. That's just her way, but I mean it about staying. There's no rush for you to leave. Take your time getting established, making sure this is where you want to be. Marianne held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, Yates, for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I don't know how to express how much your kindness has meant. He looked down at the harness in his hands, and she thought she saw color rise in his cheeks. Anyone decent would have done the same. That's not true, and you know it. He met her eyes again, and something passed between them, a recognition of connection that made Marianne's breath catch. Then Eliza bustled in with questions about supper, and the moment passed, but it lingered in Marianne's mind as she went about the evening's tasks. The days turned into weeks. Marianne's sewing work increased as word spread about her skill. She established a corner of the main room as her workspace and spent her days stitching while Eliza went about her household duties. They talked as they worked, and Marianne learned about life in Utah territory, about the challenges and rewards of ranching, about Eliza's hopes for the future. "You want to marry?" Marianne asked one afternoon as she hemmed a particularly elaborate dress. Eliza paused in her bread kneading. "Someday, if I meet the right person, but I'm in no rush. I like my life here and I'm not going to marry just to be married. Too many women do that and end up miserable." Marianne thought of Frederick Morton and nodded. "That's wise. What about you? Will you try again? Finding a husband, I mean." "I don't know. The idea of trusting someone's promises again is frightening. I thought I was being careful before, taking time with the correspondence, asking questions. But I was wrong about everything that mattered." "Maybe you were looking in the wrong place," Eliza said carefully. "Maybe the right person is someone you meet face to face, someone you get to know as they really are, not as they present themselves in letters." Marianne knew Eliza was talking about Yates. It wasn't subtle, but it wasn't unwelcome either. The truth was that Marianne thought about Yates constantly. She looked forward to meals when they would all sit together. She found excuses to be outside when he was working with the horses. She lay awake at night in her narrow bed, thinking about his hands and his voice and the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. But she was afraid of being wrong again, afraid of reading interest where there was only kindness, afraid of risking her heart when it was still bruised from the last disappointment. One evening in early October, Yates came in from the barn looking frustrated. "That sorrel mare is proving more difficult than I expected. She's smart but stubborn, and she doesn't trust easily. I've been working with her for 2 weeks and we're barely making progress." "Maybe she needs a different approach," Marianne said without thinking. Yates looked at her with interest. "What do you mean?" "Well, I don't know anything about horses, but when I was teaching girls to sew back in Philadelphia, I learned that sometimes the ones who resisted the most weren't being stubborn. They were scared or had been taught badly before, and they needed patience and a gentler hand before they could learn." Yates sat down heavily in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You might be right. She came from a ranch where they used rough methods. Maybe she's got reason not to trust. Could you try just spending time with her without asking her to do anything? Let her get comfortable with your presence before you push for more. That's not a bad idea." Yates smiled at her, a real smile that reached his eyes and made her stomach flutter. "You're pretty smart for someone who claims not to know horses." "I know about fear and trust," Marianne said quietly. "Those things are the same whether you have 2 legs or 4. His smile faded into something more serious. "I suppose they are." The next day, Yates invited Marianne to come watch him work with the mare. She left her sewing and followed him to the round pen where the horse waited, her ears back and her eyes wary. "Her name is Copper," Yates said. "She's got good bloodlines and a solid build. She could be a fine horse if she'd let someone get close enough to train her properly." Marianne watched as Yates entered the pen. Instead of approaching the mare directly, he simply stood in the center of the space, not looking at her, just being present. The mare shifted nervously but didn't bolt. After a few minutes, Yates began talking to her in that low, soothing voice Marianne had heard him use before. He wasn't saying anything particular, just making sound, letting the horse get used to him. Slowly, incrementally, Copper's ears came forward. Her neck lowered slightly. She took one step toward Yates, then another. He remained still, letting her come to him. When she was close enough, she stretched out her neck and sniffed at his shoulder. Yates slowly raised his hand and let her sniff that too. Then, very gently, he touched her neck. Copper didn't bolt. She stood there, trembling slightly, but she didn't run. Marianne felt tears prick her eyes. There was something profound in witnessing this, in seeing trust being built moment by careful moment. It reminded her of something she was trying to build herself, though she had been afraid to name it. Yates worked with Copper for another half-hour, never pushing, always letting her set the pace. When he finally left the pen and came to stand beside Marianne at the fence, he was smiling. "You were right. She just needed to know I wasn't going to hurt her." "She's beautiful," Marianne said. "And you're very patient with her." "Patience is part of the work. Rushing things only makes everything harder in the long run." Marianne looked up at him, at his strong profile and the gentleness in his expression as he watched the mare. "Yates, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really stop at the station that day? Why did you help me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I couldn't leave you there. Because I looked at you sitting on that trunk, trying so hard to be brave, and I thought about how scared and alone you must have felt. And I thought about how my mother would have tanned my hide if she knew I'd left a woman in trouble when I could have helped." "Is that the only reason?" He turned to look at her directly. "No. I also thought you were the prettiest woman I'd ever seen, and I wanted a reason to get to know you better. But that seemed like an improper thing to say to someone I'd just met, so I kept it to myself." Marianne's heart was beating so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I'm glad you stopped. Even though I was frightened and everything was terrible, I'm glad it was you who found me. Marianne." He said her name like it meant something, like it was important. "I know you've got cause to be wary of men making promises, and I know you're still finding your feet here. But I need you to know that you've become important to me, real important, and if you ever felt like maybe you could trust someone again, I'd be honored if you'd consider trusting me." She had been waiting for these words without knowing it. "I do trust you. You've shown me who you are every single day since we met, and I—" She hesitated, then found her courage. "I care for you, more than I probably should after such a short time." His face transformed with joy. "There's no should about feelings. They exist or they don't. And if you're saying what I think you're saying, then I'm the happiest man in Utah territory right now. I'm saying I'd like to see where this could go, if you want the same thing. I want that more than anything." He reached for her hand and she gave it to him. His palm was warm and rough against hers, solid and real. They stood there by the fence, holding hands and watching Copper graze in the pen, and Marianne felt something broken inside her begin to mend. After that day, Everything changed and nothing changed. They still worked their separate tasks during the day. They still ate meals together with Eliza. They still talked in the evenings by lamplight. But now there was an understanding between them, a recognition of intention that colored every interaction. Yates began finding reasons to be near Marianne. He would come inside for water when she was sewing. He would ask her opinion on which horse was ready for sale. He would sit beside her at supper, their shoulders nearly touching. And Marianne found herself reaching back, meeting him halfway. She would bring him coffee when he was working in the barn. She would walk out to the corrals to watch him train. She would save the seat beside her at the table. Eliza watched them with barely concealed delight. "I knew it," she told Marianne one afternoon when they were alone. "From the first day he brought you home, I could see it. The way he looked at you, like you were something precious he was afraid to break." "I'm falling in love with him," Marianne confessed. "It terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure. He's a good man, the best I know. He'll treat you right. I know he will. That's what makes it safe to love him." The harvest dance that had been the source of so much sewing work finally arrived in late October. The entire community gathered in the largest barn in Ogden, which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. A local band played fiddle and guitar, and tables groaned under the weight of contributed food. Marianne wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. She had styled her hair carefully, allowing a few curls to frame her face. When she emerged from her room, Yates stared at her with such open admiration that she blushed. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." He did. He had trimmed his hair and shaved carefully, and he wore clean clothes that emphasized his lean, strong build. He offered her his arm, and they rode into town together in the wagon, Eliza chattering excitedly beside them. The dance was unlike anything Marianne had experienced in Philadelphia. It was warmer, more communal, less concerned with propriety and more focused on genuine enjoyment. People welcomed her without reservation, thanking her for the work she had done on their clothes and asking about her life in the East. But what she remembered most was dancing with Yates. He was surprisingly graceful for such a tall man, leading her through reels and waltzes with confidence. His hand at her waist was warm and steady, and she could feel the strength in his arms as he guided her through the turns. "I didn't know you could dance," she said during a brief pause in the music. "My mother insisted we learn. Said it was a sign of good breeding and we weren't going to be complete savages just because we lived in the territories." He grinned. "I complained at the time, but I'm grateful now." They danced until her feet ached and her cheeks hurt from smiling. When the evening finally wound down, Yates helped her into the wagon with exaggerated care, and they rode home under a canopy of stars so bright and numerous they took Marianne's breath away. "I've never seen so many stars," she whispered. "No city lights out here to drown them out. On clear nights like this, it feels like you could reach up and touch heaven." Eliza had dozed off in the back of the wagon, tired from dancing and socializing. Yates and Marianne sat close together on the bench seat, their shoulders touching. Without thinking about it, Marianne leaned her head against his shoulder. He shifted slightly to accommodate her, his arm coming around to hold her steady. "This has been the best night I've had in years," she said quietly. "For me too." He paused, then added, "Marianne, I know we haven't been courting long, but I'm a straightforward man and I believe in speaking plain. I love you. I think I've loved you since I saw you sitting on that trunk at the station, trying so hard to be brave. And I want you to know that my intentions are serious. When you're ready, if you're willing, I'd like to marry you." Marianne's heart swelled so large she thought it might burst. "I love you too. And yes, when the time is right, I'll marry you." He pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the road and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, a kiss that tasted of future and hope and home. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "Sorry," Yates said, not sounding sorry at all. "I probably should have waited for a more proper moment." "That was perfect," Marianne assured him. Behind them, Eliza's sleepy voice said, "About time you two figured that out. Now can we please go home? I'm freezing." They all laughed, and Yates got the wagon moving again. Marianne stayed tucked against his side for the rest of the journey, feeling happier than she had ever imagined possible. They decided to wait until spring to marry, wanting time to do things properly. Marianne wanted to establish herself more firmly in the community, to feel like she was bringing something of value to the marriage beyond her need for security. Yates understood and supported this, though he made it clear he would have married her the next day if she had been willing. The winter months passed in a blur of work and courtship. Marianne's sewing business thrived as word spread about her skill and reliability. She saved most of what she earned, planning for a future she could now envision clearly. Yates continued his work with the horses, and Marianne often joined him, learning about his trade and occasionally helping with the gentler animals. Copper, the sorrel mare who had been so difficult, had become one of Yates's best success stories. Through patience and consistency, he had transformed her from a frightened, reactive animal into a responsive, reliable mount. He gave her to Marianne as a Christmas gift. "She's yours," he said, presenting the mare with a new bridle and saddle blanket. "I thought you two had something in common, both being smart and beautiful and needing someone patient enough to earn your trust." Marianne cried and kissed him in front of everyone, not caring who saw. Copper became her constant companion, and she learned to ride properly under Yates's careful instruction. There was freedom in it, she discovered, in being able to move across the land on horseback, in feeling the power of the animal beneath her, and knowing she could control and direct it through partnership rather than force. In February, Yates took her to the small church in Ogden where they would be married. They spoke with Reverend Thomas about the ceremony and made arrangements for the first Saturday in May. Eliza immediately began planning, her excitement infectious. "We'll have the ceremony in the morning and a celebration at the ranch afterward," she declared. "Nothing too fancy but nice, proper. We'll invite everyone who's been kind to you both, and we'll have good food and music and dancing. It will be wonderful." Marianne had never had anyone make such a fuss over her, and it felt overwhelming in the best possible way. She wrote a letter to her few remaining friends in Philadelphia, telling them about her unexpected happiness. The responses that eventually arrived were full of joy for her, and relief that she had found something genuine after such a harsh disappointment. As winter gave way to spring, the land transformed around them. The mountains lost their snow caps slowly, feeding streams that rushed full and fast through the valley. Wildflowers appeared in unexpected places, splashes of color against the brown earth. The horses grew glossy coats and energetic from good grazing. Everything felt full of possibility. 2 weeks before the wedding, Yates asked Marianne to ride out with him to a spot he wanted to show her. They saddled their horses and headed into the hills, following trails only Yates knew. After an hour of riding, they came to a meadow tucked between protective rises, where a spring fed a small pond and cottonwood trees provided shade. "This is the prettiest spot on the property," Yates said. "I've always thought if I ever built another house, I'd build it here." Marianne looked around, seeing it with new eyes. "It's beautiful, so peaceful. I wanted to show it to you because I've been thinking." He dismounted and helped her down. "The house we live in now is fine, but it's small, and it's where Eliza grew up, where our parents died." I think she might want her own space eventually to make her own life. And I thought maybe you and I could build something new here, something that's ours from the start. You want to build a house? Here. Eventually, yes, not right away. These things take time and money. But in a few years, when we're more established, when we've saved enough. I wanted you to see it, to know what I'm working toward. A home we designed together where we can raise our family. Marianne walked to the edge of the pond and looked out across the meadow. She could picture it easily. A house with a wide porch, windows that caught the morning sun, a garden space for vegetables and flowers, children playing by the pond under the cottonwoods, horses grazing beyond. A life built slowly and carefully, one decision at a time. I love it, she said. I love this plan and this place and you. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. They stood like that for a long time, just being together in the place where their future would someday take root. The day of the wedding dawned clear and warm, perfect spring weather. Marianne dressed in the gown she had made herself, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored silk she had splurged on from a traveling merchant. Eliza helped her with her hair, weaving in small wildflowers that matched her bouquet. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Eliza said, her eyes bright with tears. "My brother is the luckiest man alive. I'm the lucky one. I came here with nothing, running from disappointment, and I found everything I didn't know I needed." The ceremony was small and heartfelt. Reverend Thomas spoke about love and commitment, about choosing each other every day, about building a life together through good times and hard. When Yates said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Marianne's face. When it was her turn, she spoke from her heart about trust and courage, and the unexpected grace of being seen and valued for exactly who she was. "I came west as one person and became someone new," she said. "Not because I changed who I was, but because you saw who I could be and helped me become her. I promise to love you, to stand beside you, to build a life with you that honors both of us. From this day forward, you are my home." There wasn't a dry eye in the church, including Yates's. He kissed her when Reverend Thomas pronounced them married, and the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration at the ranch was everything Eliza had promised. Tables groaned under food contributed by neighbors and friends. The same band from the harvest dance played lively music. People danced and laughed and celebrated the joining of two lives that had found each other against all odds. Tom and Jacob, Yates's hired men, had decorated the barn with ribbons and wildflowers. Someone had brought a cake, a towering confection that must have taken days to make. Children ran everywhere, their laughter punctuating the music. It was joyful and chaotic and absolutely perfect. As evening fell and lanterns were lit against the growing darkness, Yates pulled Marianne aside to a quiet corner. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I knew was possible." "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." They danced together as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative conversations, their first admission of feelings, their first kiss. Marianne thought about the woman she had been at the train station 9 months ago, abandoned and afraid. That woman would never have believed she could find herself here, in the arms of a good man who loved her, surrounded by community and purpose and hope. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, sensing her distraction. "About how grateful I am that Frederick Morton broke his promise. If he hadn't, I never would have met you." Yates pulled her closer. "Then I guess I owe him a debt, though it pains me to admit it. His loss was very much my gain." "Our gain," Marianne corrected. "I think we both won something precious." "That we did, Mrs. Quinn, that we did." The party continued late into the night, but eventually the guests departed, calling out well wishes as they left. Eliza tactfully announced she was staying with a friend in town for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy. When the last wagon rattled away and silence settled over the ranch, Yates and Marianne finally found themselves truly alone as husband and wife. They stood on the porch of the house they would share, looking out at the dark shapes of the corrals and pastures, at the mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky. "Ready to start our life together?" Yates asked. Marianne took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and the gentle strength that spoke of character. "I've been ready since the day you said you'd take me home." He led her inside, and they closed the door on the rest of the world. The first year of marriage was an education in partnership. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, their strengths and weaknesses, their hopes and fears. They had their first argument 6 weeks after the wedding, over something small that escalated because they were both tired and stressed. But they learned to talk through conflict, to listen to each other, to compromise without keeping score. Marianne's sewing business continued to grow. She was now the primary dressmaker for the entire area, with Mrs. Patterson having essentially retired and passing most of her clients to the younger woman. Marianne hired 2 local girls as apprentices, teaching them the trade and creating opportunities where none had existed before. Yates's horse operation also thrived. His reputation for producing well-trained, reliable animals spread, and he began receiving orders from as far away as California. He hired another hand to help manage the increased workload, and he and Marianne began seriously saving toward building their new house in the meadow. Eliza, as Yates had predicted, began courting a young man from town, the son of the general store owner. His name was David Green, and he was kind and hardworking and clearly smitten with her. Yates approved, and Marianne enjoyed watching their courtship progress, seeing in it echoes of her own. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Marianne discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had seen too many women die in childbirth, too many babies fail to thrive. But when she told Yates, his delight was so pure and complete that her fears diminished in the face of his confidence. "We're going to be parents," he said wonderingly, his hand on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Marianne, this is everything. You and me, and now this little life we made together. It's everything I ever wanted and more than I dared hope for." The pregnancy progressed normally through spring and into summer. Marianne continued her sewing work as long as she could, training her apprentices to take on more responsibility. Yates became absurdly protective, trying to prevent her from doing anything he deemed too strenuous, which led to some amusing battles of will. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Marianne said more than once. "I know, but humor me. I can't lose you. I won't survive it." His fear was real and understandable, so she compromised, accepting help when it was reasonable and asserting her independence when he went too far. Eliza, now engaged to David and planning her own wedding for the fall, was a constant source of support and companionship. In December, during a snowstorm that blanketed the valley in white, Marianne went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Yates's fears seemed justified. But Marianne was strong, and with the help of the midwife and Eliza's steady presence, she brought their son into the world as dawn broke over the mountains. They named him Samuel Yates Quinn after both grandfathers. He was small and red and perfect, with his father's green eyes and a surprisingly full head of dark hair. Yates held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He's beautiful. You're amazing." I can't believe we made this perfect little person." "We did," Marianne said, exhausted but exhilarated. "We made him together, and we'll raise him together." Samuel was a relatively easy baby, sleeping well and eating enthusiastically. Yates was a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Marianne for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just watching his son sleep, as though he couldn't quite believe he was real. Eliza married David in October as planned, in the same church where Yates and Marianne had exchanged vows. They settled in town above the general store, and Eliza threw herself into helping David run the business. She visited the ranch often, doting on her nephew and helping Marianne manage the demands of motherhood and work. As Samuel grew, he showed signs of inheriting both his parents' temperaments. He was curious and observant like his mother, but he also had his father's patience and affinity for animals. Before he could walk, he was reaching for the horses, making delighted sounds when they came near. When Samuel was 18 months old, Yates announced that he had saved enough to begin building their house in the meadow. Construction started in the spring, with Yates doing much of the work himself, assisted by Tom, Jacob, and various neighbors who came to help. Marianne visited the site often, Samuel on her hip, watching their home take shape board by board. The house was larger than the original, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a separate parlor, and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Yates had included large windows to capture the views and the light. There was a workshop space where Marianne could do her sewing, and plans for a larger barn and updated corrals. They moved in late summer, after nearly 2 years of marriage at the original house. The new house smelled of fresh wood and paint, and everything was clean and bright. Marianne cried when she walked through it for the first time as their home, overwhelmed by the reality of this dream they had built together. "It's perfect," she told Yates. "Absolutely perfect." "It's ours," he replied. "Every nail and board chosen by us, placed by us. This is our home for as long as we live." That night, they christened every room, ending up in their new bedroom overlooking the meadow, making love in their own bed in their own house with their son sleeping peacefully down the hall. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Yates tracing lazy patterns on Marianne's skin. "Do you ever think about that day at the station?" Marianne asked. "Sometimes. I think about what might have happened if I hadn't stopped there, if I'd gone straight home, or if someone else had found you first. I think we were meant to find each other. I don't usually believe in fate, but I can't explain us any other way. Maybe you're right. All I know is I'm grateful every single day that I made that choice. It was the best decision of my life." Time continued its steady march. Samuel grew from baby to toddler to young boy, energetic and bright and deeply loved. Marianne's sewing business evolved, becoming more selective as she focused on custom work for established clients. Yates's reputation as a horse trainer reached legendary status in the territory, and he began being invited to work with difficult animals throughout the region. When Samuel was 4, Marianne discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news came with less fear and more simple joy. She knew what to expect now, knew her own strength and her husband's unwavering support. Their daughter was born on a beautiful May morning, almost exactly 6 years after Marianne and Yates had married. They named her Caroline, after Marianne's mother. She had her mother's fine features and her father's dark hair, and from her first moments, she was fiercely independent and determined. Samuel adored his little sister, treating her like a precious treasure. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, talking to her in his serious little voice, telling her about the horses and the ranch, and everything she would need to know when she was big enough to explore. Eliza and David had their own children by then, two boys who were close in age to Samuel. The cousins spent long summer days together, running wild through the meadow, learning to ride, helping with small chores around the ranch. Family dinners happened weekly, with everyone gathering either at the ranch or in town, creating memories and traditions that would sustain them all through harder times, because hard times did come. There were difficult winters when snow fell for weeks and they worried about the horses. There were dry summers when water ran low and pastures turned brown. There was the year a disease swept through the herd, killing 3 horses before they could contain it. There was the time Samuel broke his arm falling from a tree, and Marianne had to ride for the doctor while Yates held their sobbing son. There was the drought that threatened everyone's livelihood and required the whole community to band together to survive. But through every challenge, Yates and Marianne faced it as a team. They made decisions together, supported each other through worry and loss, celebrated victories as shared triumphs. Their love deepened and matured, becoming something richer and more complex than the first flush of romance, though that never entirely faded. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Marianne back to the spot where they had first talked about building their home. They left the children with Eliza and rode out together, just the two of them, as they rarely got to do anymore. 10 years, Yates said as they sat by the pond, now familiar rather than new. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like you've always been here with me. I know what you mean. I barely remember who I was before you. That frightened girl at the station feels like someone else entirely. She was brave and strong and beautiful. You still are. You're just more yourself now, more comfortable in your own skin. Marianne leaned against him, fitting into his side as naturally as breathing. I've been thinking about that day a lot lately, about Frederick Morton and his broken promise. I should probably hate him, but I can't. Because without his betrayal, I never would have been at that station. You never would have found me. Do you ever wonder what happened to him? Not really. He made his choice and I made mine, or rather, you made yours and gave me the chance to make mine. That's what matters. Yates turned to face her, cupping her cheek in his palm. I want you to know something. These 10 years with you have been the best of my life. Every day, even the hard ones, has been better because you were in it. You've made me a better man, a better father, a better human being. And I love you more now than I did the day we married, which I wouldn't have thought possible. Tears slipped down Marianne's cheeks. I love you too. You saved me, Yates, not just from being stranded at that station, but from a life of loneliness and disappointment. You showed me what love really looks like, what partnership really means, and you gave me a family and a home and a purpose. I will never stop being grateful for you. They kissed there by the pond, 10 years married and still making each other's hearts race. The sun moved across the sky as they talked and remembered and dreamed about the future still ahead of them. They talked about Samuel starting school in town that fall, about Caroline's fearless personality, about expanding the horse operation, about maybe adding rooms to the house if more children came. You want more? Yates asked. Children, I mean, Marianne considered. I don't know. I love the 2 we have, but if another one came along, I'd be happy. What about you? Same. I'm content with what we have, but I'm open to whatever comes. As long as I have you, I can handle anything. They rode back to the ranch as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house lights were visible from a distance, warm and welcoming. Their home, their life, their everything. The children rushed out when they heard the horses, Samuel lifting Caroline so she could see better. Eliza and David were on the porch, smiling at the scene. Inside, Marianne knew there would be a special dinner prepared. A cake, presents, celebrating a decade of marriage and the promise of decades more to come. As Yates helped her dismount, Marianne looked around at everything they had built. The house, the barns, the corrals. The horses grazing peacefully. The mountains standing eternal watch. The family waiting to welcome them home. It was so much more than she had imagined that day at the station, so much richer and fuller than any promise written in letters could have been. "Thank you," she whispered to Yates. "For what?" "For stopping, for offering, for taking me home." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Thank you for trusting me enough to say yes. It changed everything." Hand in hand, they walked toward the house where their children waited, where love and laughter and life continued to grow and flourish, rooted deep in the red earth of Utah territory, strong enough to weather any storm. The years continued to pass in that inevitable way time has, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. Samuel grew tall and strong, showing a natural gift for working with horses that delighted Yates beyond measure. He was patient like his father, with gentle hands and an intuitive understanding of what animals needed. By the time he was 12, he was helping with the training full-time after his schoolwork was complete. Caroline was different, more interested in books and numbers than animals. She inherited her mother's eye for detail and her quick mind, and she began helping Marianne with the business side of the sewing operation, managing orders and accounts with impressive competence for such a young girl. She also showed an interest in medicine, peppering the doctor with questions whenever he visited the ranch, reading every medical text she could get her hands on. "She's going to do something remarkable," Marianne told Yates one evening as they watched Caroline pore over a book about anatomy. "She has dreams bigger than this place can hold." "Then we'll help her achieve them," Yates replied without hesitation. "Whatever she needs, we'll find a way." When Samuel was 14 and Caroline was 10, Marianne discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise that delighted everyone. This time she carried twins, 2 more boys who arrived squalling and healthy in the middle of summer. They named them James and Joseph, and the household became even more chaotic and joyful. Samuel and Caroline took to their new siblings with enthusiasm, helping care for them and fighting over who got to hold them. The twins were identical in appearance but different in temperament from the start. James was calm and observant, while Joseph was active and vocal, making his needs known from the moment he entered the world. With 4 children now, the house that had seemed so spacious suddenly felt full. But it was a good fullness, the kind that spoke of life being lived fully and loudly. Marianne sometimes felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work required to keep everyone fed, clothed, and cared for. But Yates was a true partner in every sense, taking on domestic tasks without being asked, making sure Marianne had time for herself and her work. "I couldn't do this without you," she told him regularly. "You could," he always replied, "but you shouldn't have to. We're in this together." The horse operation had grown substantially. Yates now employed 6 full-time hands and had contracts with 3 different Army forts, several freight companies, and numerous private buyers. The ranch was prosperous, though Yates never let success change his essential nature. He remained humble and hardworking, treating his employees fairly and maintaining the personal touch that had built his reputation. Marianne's sewing business had evolved too. She no longer took every job that came her way, instead focusing on high-quality custom work for clients who appreciated her artistry and were willing to pay for it. Her apprentices had become skilled seamstresses themselves, and one had opened her own shop in the next town over, crediting Marianne with giving her the skills and confidence to do so. By their 15th anniversary, Yates and Marianne had become pillars of the community. They were the couple people came to for advice, for help settling disputes, for support during hard times. Their marriage was held up as an example of what partnership could look like, and more than one young couple sought their counsel when starting their own lives together. "How do you make it work?" a young bride asked Marianne at a church social. 15 years and you still seem so happy together." Marianne thought about how to answer truthfully. "We choose each other every day, not just once at the altar, but every morning when we wake up. We talk about everything, even the difficult things. We support each other's dreams and work together toward common goals, and we never forget that we're on the same side, even when we disagree about something." It sounds simple when you say it like that. Simple isn't the same as easy. It takes work and intention and forgiveness, but it's the most worthwhile work I've ever done. On their 20th anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. Samuel was 19 now, effectively running the training operation alongside his father. He had his eye on a girl in town, the teacher's daughter, and Yates and Marianne expected an engagement announcement any day. Caroline, at 15, was preparing to leave for medical school in Salt Lake City. It had taken years of planning and saving, and they'd had to fight against considerable resistance to the idea of a woman studying medicine. But Caroline's determination was absolute, and she had earned a place through her excellent grades and her passionate letters to the school administrators. "I'm going to come back," she assured her parents. "When I'm trained, I'm coming back here to practice. This community needs a doctor, and I want to be the one to provide that care." James and Joseph, now 9, were still trying to figure out their own paths, but they were bright and curious and well-loved. They had grown up in a house filled with affection and encouragement, and it showed in their confidence and kindness. The anniversary celebration was held at the ranch, just as the wedding had been 20 years before. Friends and neighbors came from miles around. The same band, or at least some of the same members now considerably grayer, played music. There was dancing and food and laughter. As evening fell and lanterns were lit against the darkness, Marianne and Yates found themselves alone for a moment on the porch of the house they had built together. 20 years, Marianne said wonderingly. "Has it really been that long? And it still doesn't feel like enough time. I could have 100 years with you and still want more." She turned to face him, this man who had stopped at a train station 2 decades ago and changed the entire trajectory of her life. His face showed the marks of time now. There were lines around his eyes and some gray in his hair. But his eyes still held that same kindness and strength that had first made her trust him. "You remember what you said to me that day, at the station, 'I'll take you home.' And you did. You took me home and made me part of your home and helped me understand what home really means. Not a place, but a person, a partnership, a choice made over and over." Yates pulled her close, and they swayed together to the music drifting from inside. "Best choice I ever made, mine too." They stood there together, watching the stars emerge overhead, the same stars that had witnessed every important moment of their lives together. Inside, their children laughed and played. Around them, friends celebrated the love that had started so unexpectedly and had grown into something unshakable. Marianne thought about the woman she had been, sitting on that trunk at the station, abandoned and afraid. She thought about the journey that had brought her to that moment, all the disappointments and struggles that had seemed overwhelming at the time. And she understood finally that all of it had been necessary, had been part of a path that led to exactly where she needed to be. "I wouldn't change anything," she said softly. "Not even the hard parts, because they all led to this." "To us," Yates agreed. "To us." They kissed there on the porch of their home, 20 years married and still discovering new depths to their love. The future stretched ahead of them, full of promise and possibility. There would be grandchildren someday when Samuel married his teacher's daughter. There would be pride in watching Caroline achieve her dreams. There would be joy in seeing James and Joseph find their own paths. There would be the continued work of running the ranch and maintaining their business. But through it all, there would be this: the two of them, partners in every sense of the word, facing whatever came with the absolute certainty that they would face it together. The party continued late into the night, just as it had at their wedding. But eventually, the guests departed, calling out their congratulations and well wishes. The children finally fell into bed, exhausted from excitement. Yates and Marianne stood alone in their living room, surrounded by the evidence of 20 years of life together. "Tired?" Yates asked, exhausted, but happy. "Good." He took her hand and led her toward their bedroom. "Come on, Mrs. Quinn. Let's go to bed and wake up tomorrow to start our next 20 years. Marianne followed him, her heart full to overflowing. She had been abandoned at a station once, a lifetime ago. A passing cowboy had stopped and said he'd take her home, and he had in every way that mattered. She had found her home, not in a place but in a person. She had found her purpose, not in a single role but in the many roles she played: wife, mother, businesswoman, friend, community member. She had found her happiness, not as something given to her, but as something she built day by day, choice by choice, in partnership with someone who valued her as much as she valued him. As they prepared for bed, moving around each other with the practiced ease of decades together, Marianne caught sight of their reflection in the mirror. They were older now, marked by time and experience. But they were also more themselves than they had ever been, comfortable and confident in their shared life. "I love you," she said, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "I love you too. Always have, always will." They climbed into bed and into each other's arms, the familiar comfort of bodies that knew each other completely. Outside, the night settled over the ranch, over the meadow where their house stood, over the land they had worked and loved for 2 decades. Inside, Yates and Marianne drifted toward sleep, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, and they would face all of it together, just as they always had. The story that had started with abandonment and fear had transformed into one of love and partnership and enduring commitment. The woman who had sat on a trunk at a train station, wondering how she would survive, had become a wife, a mother, a businesswoman, a pillar of her community. She had built a life richer than any promise could have guaranteed, because she had built it herself, with her own hands and heart, alongside someone who saw her worth and helped her become everything she was capable of being. And the cowboy who had stopped at a station and offered a ride home had gained far more than he had given. He had found a partner who challenged him and supported him, who made him better and loved him completely. He had built a family and a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting from an unexpected beginning. They had proven that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when everything falls apart, when plans fail and promises break, when you find yourself abandoned at a station with no clear path forward. Because sometimes, in those moments of complete uncertainty, a stranger on a horse rides up and offers you everything you never knew you needed. Sometimes he takes you home, and in doing so, helps you understand that home was never about a place at all. It was about finding the person who sees you, really sees you and chooses you anyway. It was about building something together, day by day, choice by choice, through good times and hard times and everything in between. It was about love that grows deeper with time rather than fading, about partnership that becomes stronger under pressure rather than breaking. As sleep finally claimed them both, Yates and Marianne held each other close, grateful beyond words for the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. Tomorrow would come with its own demands and delights. But tonight, they rested in the peace of knowing they had found something rare and precious. They had found each other. And they had built a home together that would shelter their family for generations to come. A legacy of love and partnership that started with 5 simple words spoken at a train station 20 years ago. "I'll take you home." And he had. He truly had taken her home in every way that mattered. And she had made his home complete in return. Together, they had created something that would endure, a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and flourishing against all odds. Their story, which had begun with such uncertainty and fear, had become something beautiful and enduring. And as they slept, wrapped in each other's arms in the house they had built together, the stars continued their eternal watch overhead, bearing witness to a love that had started unexpectedly and had grown into something unshakable, something that would last as long as those mountains stood and those stars shone. Their happily ever after wasn't a destination, but a journey they walked together, hand in hand, day by day, for all the years that followed. And it was everything, absolutely everything, that either of them had ever dreamed of and more than they had dared to hope for when they first met on that platform in Ogden, Utah Territory, on a September afternoon in 1878, when a cowboy stopped and changed everything with 5 simple words.